The day I quit my job, I sat in my car for 20 minutes and just breathed. I had not done that in years. There was no alarm waiting for me, no manager, no commute, no performance review, no one pulling at me. I had planned this for 2 years. I had saved carefully, lived small, and built a quiet cushion so I could rest, recover, and figure out what I actually wanted from my life. It felt like the first day I had given myself permission to exist without producing something for someone else. I drove home, made tea, and sat by the window. The feeling lasted 4 hours. Then my phone rang and my sister's name lit up the screen, and something in my stomach dropped before I even answered. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not ask if I was okay. The very first sentence out of her mouth was, "So now that you're free, you'll cover us while I sort things out, right?" I stayed so quiet she thought the call had dropped. It had not. I was just trying to understand how someone could know me that little after 32 years of being sisters. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something honestly. Has someone in your life ever watched you make a sacrifice for yourself, something you worked years for, and immediately treated it like an opportunity for them? Not congratulations. Not "are you okay?" Just a hand already reaching. If you have ever been that person, the reliable one, the one who figures it out, the one people assume will catch them, stay with me. Because Lousia's story is about what happens when the reliable one finally stops catching people who never once learned to stand up on their own. My name is Lousia, and I need to tell you something about the kind of tired I was before I quit that job. Not the tired you feel after a long day. Not the tired that a good night's sleep fixes. I mean the kind of tired that lives in your chest, the kind where you wake up and your first feeling is dread, not of anything specific, but of the whole shape of the day ahead of you. I had worked at the same insurance company for 9 years. I had started as an entry-level claims processor and worked my way up to a senior analyst position, which sounds impressive but mostly meant I had more responsibility with almost no extra pay and a team that relied on me to catch everyone else's mistakes. I was good at my job. I was thorough and patient, and I rarely made errors. But the job had started to eat something in me that I could not name until I was almost out of it. I am 32 years old. I am not married. I do not have children. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized city, which I chose deliberately because it was affordable and close enough to my family that I could reach them in under 2 hours when something came up, but far enough that I had a life of my own. I have one younger sister, Renata, who is 28. She is pretty and charming and very good at making people feel like they are the center of her world, right up until the moment she needs something and they realize they were never the center at all. She is married to a man named Darren. They have a 4-year-old daughter named Piper, who I genuinely love with my whole heart, separate from whatever complicated feelings I have about Renata. Our mother lives 40 minutes from Renata and her family. Our father passed away when I was 16 and Renata was 12, and after that, our mother held the family together the way small women often do, quietly and without credit, working 2 jobs and still making dinner most nights. Watching our mother taught me early that the people who do the most are often thanked the least. I made a private promise to myself somewhere around age 17 that I would never let anyone treat me the way people treated our mother. I kept that promise for years, but gradually and without fully noticing, I had let Renata rewrite the terms. For most of my adult life, Renata had operated on the assumption that I was the solution to whatever problem she was currently experiencing. When she needed a deposit for her first apartment at 23, she called me. When she and Darren had a rough patch and she needed to spend 3 weeks away from him to think, she came to my apartment. When Piper was born and Renata needed help in the early months because Darren's work schedule was unpredictable, I took 2 weeks of vacation time to drive to her city and help with the baby. When their car needed repairs they could not afford, I lent them money. Some of it came back. Most of it did not. When it did not come back, Renata never mentioned it directly. She would just change the subject or act slightly hurt if I brought it up, as if my needing to be repaid made me small. I want to be clear about something. None of those things I did were forced on me. I chose to help. I am a person who loves her family, but there is a difference between choosing to help because you want to and becoming someone's default plan because they have. Decided you will never say no. Over time, Renata had stopped asking and started assuming. It was subtle, and she was good at making it feel like love. She framed everything in the language of closeness. We're sisters. We take care of each other. That's what family does. It is very hard to argue against that framing without sounding like a cold person, so I rarely argued. I just kept giving. The job got worse around my 9th year. My direct manager left and was replaced by someone who had come from a different division and had very little understanding of what our team actually did. He was the type of manager who made decisions based on what looked good in meetings rather than what actually worked. I watched our team lose 2 experienced people in 8 months and was given their responsibilities without any additional pay. My health started to suffer. I was not sleeping properly. I had tension headaches 3 or 4 days a week. My appetite was off. I started dreading Sunday evenings the way some people dread illness. I talked to a doctor. I talked to a therapist I had been seeing for about a year. Both of them said variations of the same thing. Your body is telling you something needs to change. The therapist, whose name was Dr. Margulies, was careful and specific. She did not tell me to quit. She helped me look clearly at what I actually had versus what I thought I had to be afraid of losing. And when I really looked, here is what I found. I had been saving for 6 years, quietly, automatically. Every month a portion of my paycheck went somewhere that Renata did not know about, that almost no one in my family knew about. It was not a secret exactly. It was just mine. I had enough saved that I could go without a salary for approximately 14 months if I was careful, longer if I picked up any freelance analysis work, which I had been quietly building skills toward. I made a plan. I would give the company one final quarter. I would document everything, transition my knowledge properly, and leave with my head up. I would not burn anything. I would not make it dramatic. I would simply stop. I told exactly 2 people, Dr. Margulies and my closest friend, a woman named Cecile, who has been in my life since college and who responded by buying me a small, succulent plant and leaving it on my doorstep with a card that said, "You've been holding your breath for years, now exhale." I kept that card. I still have it. I gave my notice in the 2nd week of a Tuesday. My manager seemed genuinely surprised, which told me everything about how visible my exhaustion had been to the people around me. My team gave me a small celebration in the break room, the kind with a grocery store cake and paper plates. I hugged everyone and meant it. And then I left. I drove home, I sat in my car, and I breathed for 20 minutes. I told you about those 20 minutes already. They were real and they were good. What I had not prepared for was my sister. I did not call Renata right away to tell her I had quit. We texted occasionally and spoke on the phone maybe twice a month. I figured I would mention it naturally when it came up. But Renata has always had a way of knowing things before you tell her. Our mother, I suspect, mentioned it to her. My mother had not meant any harm. She was proud of me in her own quiet way and probably spoke about it without fully thinking through what Renata would do with the information. The call came 4 hours after I got home on my first official day of freedom. I was still sitting by my window. I had been watching a pigeon on the building across the street, doing nothing, just watching it, which felt luxurious in a way I cannot fully describe. Then my phone rang and it was Renata. I answered in good faith. I thought maybe she had heard and was calling to say something kind. She did not say anything kind. "So now that you're free," she said, and the way she said free had a little arch in it, like the word was a bit of an exaggeration. "You'll cover us while I sort things out, right?" I asked her what she meant by cover us. She explained that she and Darren had been having financial stress for several months. He had changed jobs, and the new position paid less than the old one. Their apartment lease was coming up for renewal, and the landlord had raised the rent significantly. Renata had been thinking about going back to work. She had stopped working when Piper was born and had not returned, but she had not found the right opportunity yet. And now, knowing that I had savings, knowing that I was not currently working, she had decided that the solution was for me to move closer to them, or at least begin transferring money monthly to help cover their gap. She said it the way you say something that has already been decided, not a request, an announcement, a gentle announcement delivered warmly because that is Renata's style. She wrapped it in the language of sisterhood and family and temporary and just until. Things stabilize, but the structure of it was unmistakable. She had heard I had money and time, and she had immediately built a use for both of them that had nothing to do with me. I was quiet for a moment, and then I said, calmly, that I needed to think. She laughed a little nervously and said, "What's there to think about? Your family." I said I would call her back. I hung up and sat with what had just happened. Here is what I felt in order. First, I felt something sharp in my chest, not quite hurt, more like recognition. This was not a new pattern. I had been here before in smaller ways, but this was the largest version of it so far, and the timing was what made it feel so specifically wrong. I had just made the biggest, most careful decision of my adult life. I had done everything right. I had saved, I had planned, I had waited, I had left cleanly. And before I had even had a full afternoon to feel that, my sister had arrived to absorb it. Second, I felt something quieter underneath the sharp feeling, something that had been building for a long time. I had given Renata a lot over the years. A lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of accommodation. And what I realized, sitting there by my window with my tea cooling in my hand, was that I could not remember a single time Renata had asked how I was doing when she did not need anything from me first. I could not remember a time she had shown up for me without me having to ask, clearly and specifically, and even then sometimes not at all. I thought about all the moments I had covered for her, absorbed for her, smoothed over for her. I thought about the times I had gone without something I wanted because I was sending money to someone who never thought to ask if I could afford it. Third, and this was the most important feeling, I felt clearly and without drama that I was not going to do this. Not this time. Not with this money, not with these months. This was mine. I had earned it at a cost to my health and my time and my nerves, and it was mine. I did not call Renata back that night. I called Cecile instead. I told her what had happened. Cecile is the kind of friend who listens all the way to the end before she says anything, which is rare and valuable. When I finished, she said, "How do you feel?" I said I felt clear. She said, "That's new." She was right. It was new. I was usually confused when it came to Renata. I would feel guilty and responsible and tangled up. But this time I just felt clear. Over the next 2 days, I did not hear from Renata. I used the time to think through my position carefully. I wrote things down, not as a strategy, but as a way of seeing my own thoughts clearly. I wrote down what I had and what I needed and what my plan actually was. I wrote down the history of what I had given Renata and Darren over the years. Not out of resentment, just out of honesty. Looking at that list was striking. It was a real number. It was not a small number. I also thought about Piper, my niece, 4 years old and wonderful and not responsible for any of this. Whatever happened between Renata and me, I was not going to let it affect my relationship with Piper. I made that decision clearly and early, and I kept it separate from everything else. On the third day, Renata called again. I answered this time. She sounded careful, which was unusual for her. She asked if I had thought about it. I said I had. She asked what I had decided. I told her, as directly and as kindly as I could, that I was not going to cover their expenses. I explained that the money I had saved was for my own transition and recovery. I explained that I had a plan for it, and that plan did not include absorbing their rent increase or their income gap. I said I was sorry their situation was difficult. I said I hoped they would figure it out. The silence on her end lasted about 4 seconds. Then she said, "So you're just not going to help us?" I said, "I help you a lot, Renata, but this is different. This is my savings. This is why I quit." She said, "You have enough for both of us. You're choosing not to." I said, "Yes, I am." Another silence. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said, "I thought we were family." And the way she said it, it was not angry, it was wounded, genuinely wounded in that specific way she had, the way that made you feel like the cruel one just for having a limit. I recognized the feeling it was trying to create in me. I had felt it many times before, but this time I could see it clearly for what it was. It was not a statement about family. It was a tool. I said, "We are family, that's not what I'm deciding." She said, "It feels like it." We ended the call without resolution. I sat with the discomfort for a while, and then I made dinner and I watched a movie and I went to bed, and I noticed that I slept better than I had in months. What happened over the following 2 weeks was a pattern I want to describe carefully, because it is important to understand how this kind of pressure actually works. It does not come all at once. It does not come loudly. It comes in small, persistent waves, each one individually manageable, but designed to wear you down through accumulation. First, Renata started texting me more often than usual. Not about the request, just regular texts, sharing a photo of Piper, mentioning something funny that happened, asking what I was doing. This is a technique, whether conscious or not, of reminding you that the person is present and lovable. It makes it harder to stay firm because you are not arguing with an abstraction. You are arguing with the person who just sent you a cute video of your niece learning to draw. Second, my mother got involved. I knew this would happen. My mother is not a manipulative person, but she is a person who deeply, genuinely, painfully hates conflict within the family. Her response to almost any tension between Renata and me has always been to encourage me to give a little more, try a little harder, be the bigger one. She called me and she did not say Renata had asked her to call, but I knew. She said she was just checking in. She said Renata seemed really stressed. She said she knew I was going through my own thing, but maybe there was some small way I could help. I listened carefully, and then I said, gently but clearly, that I loved her and I loved Renata, and I was not going to be changing my answer. My mother sighed in the way she had been sighing at me since I was a teenager, and then we talked about other things and she told me she was proud of me, which I think she meant. Third, Darren reached out. This was the unexpected one. Darren and I were friendly but not close. He sent me a message on one of the family messaging apps, something very carefully worded, saying he knew I was taking time for myself and he respected that, but things were tight and Renata really needed family support right now, and he was sure I understood. There was a flattering quality to the message, like he was speaking to me as one reasonable adult to another. It made me feel the pull of wanting to be seen as the reasonable one. I recognized that feeling too. I was learning to recognize a lot of things about how this worked. I did not respond to Darren's message. I decided it was not a conversation I needed to have with him. By the end of the second week, the texture of the communication had shifted again. Renata's texts became less frequent. There was a cooling. When she did text, there was a stiffness to it, a careful quality, like she was managing something. I recognized this too. It was the phase where the person who wanted something from you starts signaling that your refusal has cost you their warmth. It is another form of pressure. The withdrawal of closeness is meant to make you anxious enough to restore it by giving in. I sat with the anxiety this time rather than running from it. I will tell you honestly that it did not feel good. Renata is my sister, and I love her, and the idea of her being cold toward me or thinking poorly of me is not pleasant. It was never pleasant. That discomfort had been one of the primary reasons I had always eventually given in. The feeling of her disapproval was genuinely painful, but I was beginning to understand something important about that pain. It was real. But it was not a sign that I was wrong. You can do the right thing and still feel bad. Those two things can exist at the same time. About 3 weeks after my first refusal, something happened that changed the shape of everything. I got a call from a woman named Patricia. Patricia was a property manager at the apartment complex where Renata and Darren lived. She was polite and slightly awkward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, and she explained that Renata had listed me as an emergency contact and financial guarantor on their renewed lease application. She was calling to confirm that I understood the terms and had agreed to co-sign. I told Patricia, clearly and calmly, that I had not agreed to anything. I told her my name had been used without my permission. I told her I would not be co-signing. Patricia was very apologetic. She said she was sorry for the confusion and that she would need to inform the applicants. I thanked her and I hung up. I sat very still for a moment, and then something shifted inside me that I can only describe as the dissolving of a final illusion. I had been telling myself that Renata was just stressed and acting out, and that this would settle down and we would find our way back to normal. But this was not a stress reaction. Using my name on a legal document, a financial guarantor agreement, without asking me, without telling me, without any conversation at all, that was a deliberate choice. That was Renata deciding that my resources, including my legal financial standing, were available to her. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. I told her what Patricia had told me. There was a pause, then Renata said, "I was going to tell you." I asked when. She said, "When it came through, I just thought you wouldn't say no." I asked her to hear herself. I asked her to think about what she had just said. She had used my name on a legal document because she assumed I would not say no. She had not asked. She had not discussed it. She had simply taken. She said she knew it sounded bad, but she was desperate. She said things were worse than she had let on. The rent increase was significant. Darren's new salary was almost a third lower than his previous one. They had credit card debt she had not mentioned. She was scared. I could hear it in her voice, and I believed it. She was genuinely frightened. And I felt something complicated, something that was part sympathy and part exhaustion, and part a specific sadness that comes from loving someone who has spent so long using your love as a resource that they have stopped seeing you as a person who might have limits. I said to her, "Renata, I believe you're scared. I believe things are hard, and I am not going to cosign anything. I'm not going to cover your rent. I'm not going to be your financial plan, not because I don't love you, but because this is not how this works." She cried, real crying, not performance crying. I stayed on the phone and I let her. I did not rush to fix it. I did not soften my position. After she stopped, I said something I had been thinking about for weeks. I said, "You have never once asked me how I'm doing when you didn't need something first. Do you know that? Not once. I quit my job because I was exhausted and unwell and I needed to rest, and your first call to me was about what I could give you. Not, 'Are you okay, Lousia?' Not, 'I'm glad you're taking care of yourself.' Just, 'You'll cover us, right?'" The silence was different this time, longer. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. She said, "I didn't think about it like that." I said, "I know." There was something in that exchange that felt important. Not resolved, not fixed, but real. For the first time in this particular conflict, and maybe in a long time in general, we were not talking about the transaction. We were talking about what was underneath it. But I want to be honest with you. That moment of realness did not immediately change things. The hard part was still ahead. Over the next month, Renata and Darren did not renew their lease. They moved in with our mother temporarily, which was hard on my mother in ways she did not complain about, but which I could hear in her voice when we spoke. Renata was frustrated and embarrassed, and it came out sideways, in small stinging comments here and there, in a group family chat message that wasn't quite addressed to me but was clearly meant for me, something about people who have more than enough being able to sleep at night while others struggled. I saw it. My mother saw it. I did not respond to it in the chat. I texted Renata privately and said I saw what she wrote, and I was not going to engage with it there, but that if she wanted to talk, I was available. She did not respond for 4 days. Meanwhile, my own life was taking shape in ways I was grateful for. I had begun doing some freelance data analysis work through a contact from my old industry. It was not intense and it was not full-time, but it brought in a small, steady income that extended my runway significantly. I had also started doing things I had not done in years. I slept past 7. I cooked real meals. I went for walks without headphones. I started a small container garden on my balcony. I began reading again, actual books, not just the first 3 pages before I fell asleep. I made a list of what I actually wanted from the next chapter of my life, not what I was supposed to want, not what would look responsible to someone else, just what I actually wanted. Somewhere in that process, I began to see the Renata situation more clearly than I had before, not from anger. Anger had mostly moved through me by then. What I saw was this. Renata had learned at a young age, after our father died, that I was the one who held things together. I was 16. She was 12. And I had, in the very specific way that older children in grieving families often do, taken on a role that was too large for me and too important to the family's stability for anyone to help me put it down. I had been the competent one, the one who figured it out, the one who did not add to the problem. And Renata had grown up in the shadow of that, had grown up with the assumption that I would always be there to catch things, had never fully had to develop the muscle of figuring things out herself, because I was always there before she needed to. That realization did not make me responsible for fixing it, but it made me feel something softer toward her, even as I stayed firm. It made the whole thing feel less like cruelty from her and more like a pattern that had been building for 20 years, and that I had participated in building. I wrote her a long letter. Not a text, not a voice memo, an actual letter, handwritten, in the notebook I had been keeping since I left my job. I did not send it immediately. I kept it for a week and read it again. Then I revised it and wrote a cleaner version, and I mailed it. In the letter, I said a lot of things I had been thinking. I said I loved her. I said I was not trying to punish her. I said I was trying to stop a pattern that had not been good for either of us. I told her honestly what the years of helping had cost me, not to make her feel guilty, but because she deserved to know. I told her I thought she was more capable than she had ever been asked to be. I told her that Piper had a mother who was intelligent and resourceful, and that Renata could figure this out, and that me stepping in and covering it for her would only delay her believing that about herself. I told her I was still her sister. I told her I still wanted to know her. I said the door was open, but I needed the relationship to be between two people, not a benefactor and a dependent. She called me the day she got the letter. She did not start with the things in the letter. She started by crying again and saying she had not known how much she had leaned on me. She said our mother had said something similar recently and it had made her feel terrible, but that hearing it from me in writing was different. She said she had read it 3 times. She said she was angry at first, and then she reread it and she was just sad. I asked her what she was sad about. She said she was sad that we had spent so many years in this pattern without either of us saying anything directly. She said she was sad that I had been holding all of that quietly. And then she said something that I was not expecting. She said, "I think I've been really selfish, Lousia. I think I've been doing it for a long time and I didn't see it because it was convenient not to." That sentence cost her something. I could hear that it did, and I respected her for it. We did not fix everything in that call. Repair is not a phone call. Repair is a series of choices made consistently over time. But something real happened. A kind of honesty between us that I could not remember us having as adults. Not just as children, but as the women we had actually become. Things were still complicated. They were going to be complicated for a while. She and Darren were still at my mother's, which was still stressful for everyone. Darren was looking for a better paying position. Renata had begun reaching out to some contacts about part-time work. Progress, not completion. And then came the moment that I want to describe carefully, because it was the one that required the most from me. About 6 weeks after the letter, Renata called me with a plan. She and Darren had found a smaller apartment they could actually afford. They had a savings deficit that was preventing them from covering the deposit. It was not a large number in absolute terms. It was a real number, but not enormous. Renata was not asking me to be their financial plan. She was asking for a specific, bounded thing, with a concrete repayment timeline she and Darren had written out, and that she read to me over the phone, carefully. This was different, the structure was different, the conversation was different. She was asking, not assuming. She was specific, not vague. She had a plan, not just an expectation. I took 2 days to think about it. I talked to Cecile. I thought about it honestly, about whether I could afford it, about whether it felt like a repeat of the old pattern or something genuinely different. I thought about what I wanted, not what I felt obligated to do, but what I actually wanted. And I decided I would help, with a specific amount, with a written agreement. Not because I felt pressured and not because I was afraid of her disapproval, because I wanted to. Because she had done the work to ask differently and I believed her. And because at the end of it all, she was my sister and love is real and it can exist alongside limits. I transferred the money. She thanked me in a way she had not thanked me before. She thanked me like someone who understood what they were receiving. They moved into the new apartment the following month. Renata got a part-time job doing administrative work at a local nonprofit within 3 weeks of moving in. It was modest. It was a start. She called me to tell me about it with something in her voice that I had not heard in a long time. Pride. Real pride in herself for herself. In the months that followed, something quietly shifted between us. She began asking how I was. Actually asking, not as a preamble to something she needed, but just asking. We had longer calls that were not about logistics or requests. She told me things about her life that were not crises. She told me she was going to therapy and that it was helping her understand some patterns. From her childhood, including the pattern of outsourcing her problems to me. I told her I was in therapy too and had been for over a year. We laughed about that we had both been in therapy and had somehow never talked about it. My own life kept developing. The freelance work grew steadily. I had transitioned from reactive analysis projects to being a consistent contractor for 2 companies that valued my work and paid me fairly. I was not yet back to my previous income level, but I was well within my savings plan and I was not afraid. I was sleeping well. My tension headaches had almost completely stopped. I felt, genuinely and without exaggeration, like myself. A version of myself that had access to her own time and energy and choices. A version I had not been for a long time. There was one more moment I want to tell you about because I think it matters. At my niece Piper's 5th birthday party, a few months after all of this, Renata had organized a small gathering at the new apartment. It was warm and chaotic and full of children and balloons, and a cake that Renata had actually made herself, badly but lovingly, which was new. I was there with a gift for Piper and a bottle of wine for Renata. At some point in the afternoon, Renata was across the room and we caught each other's eyes, and she crossed the room and hugged me, really hugged me, and she said quietly, close to my ear, "Thank you for not just giving me what I asked for." I held on to that for a second. I said, "Thank you for hearing me." She pulled back and looked at me, and I could see she was a little teary and trying not to be because there were 5-year-olds everywhere, and it was not the moment. She waved her hand and went to go rescue the cake situation, and I stood there for a moment in the noise and chaos of my niece's birthday party, and I felt something I want to try to describe accurately. It was not triumph. I did not feel like I had won something. It was quieter than that. It felt like the moment after you put down something very heavy that you have been carrying for so long you forgot you were carrying it. It felt like space, like room, like the beginning of something that was finally honest enough to last. I drove home from that party in the early evening, with the windows down, and I thought about the version of me who had sat in her car for 20 minutes after quitting her job and just breathed. I thought about the phone call that had come 4 hours later. I thought about all the moments between then and now, the discomfort and the clarity and the letter and the argument and the repair. I thought about how different it felt to help from a place of actual choice instead of a place of fear of disapproval. I think that is the thing no one tells you when you are the reliable one, the capable one, the one who figures it out. They do not tell you that there is a version of love that becomes indistinguishable from loss of self. They do not tell you that the people who need you most are sometimes the ones who are least equipped to see what it costs you. They do not tell you that saying no is not the same as not loving someone. They do not tell you that sometimes the most loving thing you can give a person is the space to discover that they are more capable than you have both been pretending. I am still Lousia. I am still someone who helps, who gives, who loves my family. But I am also someone who belongs to herself now. That is new. That is what the whole year taught me. You can love people well and still take up space. You can love people well and still have something that is only yours. You can love people well and say no to being absorbed. The quiet ones carry a lot. The reliable ones carry even more. And somewhere along the way, the world convinces you that your capacity to carry is the most important thing about you. It is not. It is one thing about you. One thing among many. The most important thing about you is that you are a whole person, not a function, not a resource, not a plan that someone else makes for your own life. I know that now. I am still learning what to do with it, but knowing it is already something. The garden on my balcony has tomatoes now. Small ones. I grew them myself. Every morning I check on them and they are always there, doing exactly what they are supposed to do, slowly, quietly, without me pushing them. I think about that sometimes. How much things can grow when you stop forcing them and just create the right conditions. I think about Renata working her job and going to therapy and making bad birthday cakes out of love. I think about Piper, who is 5 and fearless and wonderful. I think about my mother, who is still sighing at both of us, but who also told me recently that she thought I had handled everything with a lot of maturity, which from my mother is roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. I think about Cecile and her succulent and her card that said exhale. I think about Dr. Margolies and the Rafal steady work of looking at your own life, clearly without flinching. And I think about that car and those 20 minutes and how they were the beginning of something I did not have a name for yet. I have a name for it now. I call it mine. Before you go, I want to ask you something from Lousia's story. The moment Lousia realized the biggest thing she had to put down was not the job. It was the belief that her love had to be paid in full or it would not count. That was the real turning point. So I want to ask you this. Is there someone in your life, maybe someone you love very much, who has quietly turned your reliability into their plan? And if Lousia had given in that first day, if she had just said yes and transferred the money and told herself it was love, what do you think would have happened to her a year later? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And if this story reached something real in you, share it with someone who might need it today.